Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What role is the Republic of Korea at the United Nations playing in dealing with issues such as peace and security, providing assistance with people with disabilities, and also reducing nuclear weapons? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at the Republic of Korea and the vital role it plays in dealing with many major international issues and local issues. My guest today is going to bring us up to date on some of the activities that are underway. My guest today is His Excellency Ambassador Oh Joon. Ambassador Oh Joon is the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations. Prior to that appointment, Mr. Oh Joon was ambassador to Singapore from 2010 to 2013, which he served as before he served as Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade from 2008 to 2010. Your Excellency, Ambassador Oh Joon, welcome to Global Connections Television.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. We've got a whole list of major activities that you're involved in at the United Nations. One is with the Security Council. You were the president of the Security Council this past year, I believe in May, something like that. Republic of Korea goes off. But when you were the president, each month the Security Council deals with a myriad of major issues. What was the top issue that you were dealing with at that time that related to peace and security?
Well, the Security Council is certainly one of the most important and busiest organs in the United Nations. So we in the Council always have meetings. We always have issues to debate. And when I was president in May, I think one of the most topical issues was Ukraine, as well as we also had a few other issues like Syria, South Sudan, and the conflict was very much ongoing that time in these areas.
Exactly. I remember back during the Cold War, the Security Council, some of the countries fought the Cold War at the Security Council, the Soviet Union and the U.S. in particular. But today there seems to be much more of a spirit of cooperation rather than confrontation at the Security Council. Do you find that to be the case?
At a global level, probably that's right. We are out of Cold War. We don't have that scale of global confrontation, but at regional level, and also for individual countries, we have a lot of conflicts, a lot of issues all over the world, and even sometimes inside a nation, inside a country, there are conflicts that can easily have international implications.
It's certainly many of those, yes. Now, one way that the United Nations is helping to hopefully reduce conflict and eliminate the scourge of war, as is said in the Charter, one of the three main goals of the UN when it was created in 1945, is to provide peacekeeping forces. Now, peacekeeping was never mentioned in the Charter, but it started in 1948. Today, I believe there are 16 peacekeeping missions, some in very dangerous areas of the world. And of course, the Security Council is the most powerful and legal organ in that capacity, sets up the peacekeeping missions. Is South Korea participating in the peacekeeping missions, and what role do South Korean troops provide, or do you provide logistics, or how do you do that?
Yes, we are participating in peacekeeping operations. Actually, since we joined the United Nations as a full member in 1991, before that we were an observer state. So since the 90s, we have always participated in peacekeeping operations in one way or another. Right now, we are sending about a little over 600 peacekeepers to different missions, most importantly to Lebanon and South Sudan.
So you're very actively involved.
Yes.
You certainly are, yes.
Yes.
Well, we were talking about the Security Council, and that's one of the 6 organs of the United Nations. Another major organ is the Economic and Social Council, commonly called Ecosoc. I believe you're going to be the president of Ecosoc next year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
what-
Right now,
please.
I'm vice president from the Asia and Pacific region, and we go by regional rotation. So becomes president of Ecosoc.
Exactly. Now, maybe the Economic and Social Council says everything, but basically, what does Ecosoc do as far as, I know it has a myriad of programs and a lot of infusions throughout the UN system and different programs tie into, but generally, what is it charged to do?
Ecosoc's coverage of issues is very wide. In fact, as the name indicates, Ecosoc deals with all economic and social issues. And as you can see, these areas are enormously huge these days. But right now, we are more or less concentrating on what is called sustainable development goals, which has a lot to do with the protection of environment, because climate change is one of the most serious challenges we are facing. And also we are working on what is called post-2015 development agenda, which will succeed MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, that have been with us since 2000 and that will end next year, 2015. So we are talking about what kind of a development agenda we will have after 2015.
Exactly. And of course, there were 8 Millennium Development Goals to reduce abject poverty, to promote universal primary school education, empower women. What is South Korea? I know you're doing a lot in your country, but what are some of the things you're doing to achieve those goals and to help people in other countries to perhaps achieve them?
Well, we are working with other countries to promote development cooperation, a lot of times in the form of official development assistance. We are trying to increase our volume of development assistance to developing countries. It was about $1 billion a few years ago, but sooner or later, probably by next year, it's going to be $2 billion a year. So that's one area we are concentrating on. And also in terms of post-2015 development agenda, we are focusing on issues like governance, because we think governance is very important for development, and also monitoring, because even though we have very good goals, unless we have good monitoring, we cannot be very effective.
Exactly. Now, if our viewers would like more information on what you're doing in South Korea on a wide range of issues, they can go to un.mofat.go.kr and learn a lot more about what we're talking about today and what maybe we won't get to as we go through the program. In the opening, I mentioned people with disabilities, and we see there are literally tens of millions of people around the world who suffer from a variety of disabilities, developmental disabilities, and across the board. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is a major international convention. You've been very actively involved in that. What have you been doing? What is your role, and what have you focused upon in this area to provide assistance to people with disabilities?
I will be serving as president of Conference of State Parties to CRPD. CRPD is the convention you just mentioned, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this convention came into being quite late, only in 2008. I mean, late compared to other human rights related international treaties. So we call it was the last convention related to human rights, at least in the UN system. So this convention, CRPD regime, is very much in its formative stage. So as a president of State Parties Conference, I will work with other countries, work with the Bureau to establish CRPD process more firmly and more concretely, so that we can promote the rights of persons with disabilities all over the world. You said there are many of them, and we in the disabilities community, we believe there are at least 1 billion people in the world. That's 1/7 of the world population who have some kinds of disabilities.
That is a huge number, and I think it's probably very accurate that 1 out of 7 probably could. Do you find today, and I think back to several years ago, a couple of decades ago, that so often people didn't respect people with disabilities. They had a stigma. People wanted to ignore them or whatever, perhaps in some cases make fun of them. But do you find that is changing today, that countries, governments are becoming more aware of their citizens, people within their borders who have disabilities, but also humans as we interact with one another, that we're starting to feel more empathy and sympathy for people who have disabilities, and we want to extend a hand to help them, because they can be very productive people and they're human beings, and they all have innate human values and human worth. But do you find that is changing a bit?
Well, in general, I think it's changing, but change is varied depending on the regions, depending on the status of development in a society, depending on what kind of culture you have. So we have different degrees of progress in terms of how we deal with disability issues, how we treat people with disabilities. But in general, it's changing, it's getting better. But this CRPD convention and this process is there under the auspices of United Nations, so that we can facilitate such change.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today we're talking with the ambassador from the Republic of Korea to the United Nations about the role that the Republic of Korea plays at the United Nations on a wide range of issues. My guest today is His Excellency Ambassador Oh Joon, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations. Your Excellency, we're talking about the active role that South Korea plays, and it is a very active role in dealing with many of these issues. Another one that you're involved with is in the reduction of nuclear weapons. There's a committee called the 1540 Committee. What exactly is that 1540 Committee? That's a Security Council Resolution 1540, I'm assuming. What is it do, and how are you working towards reducing the nuclear threat?
Well, 1540 Committee is a committee created by the Security Council and operating under the Security Council. It came into being in 2004, so this year we celebrated its 10th anniversary. And Resolution 1540 is about to prevent transfer of weapons of mass destruction to non-state actors. Non-state actors, this case usually means terrorist groups. So with the change of security environment in the world, especially after 9/11, this possibility of terrorists acquiring WMDs became very real threat. And if we think about it, that's a very terrible, there will be very terrible consequences if these terrorist groups get hold of WMDs. So this resolution is designed to promote cooperation among nations to prevent such a thing.
Exactly. And do we see we're making headway in getting a handle or getting an idea of how many of these weapons of mass destruction may be out there, and reducing those, and again, as you said, keeping them out of the hands of terrorists to make sure they're never used against anybody at any time, any place?
That's right. We are making headway. We have full cooperation of many countries in the world, and in some cases, some countries, even though they are willing to play their role in this in these efforts, but sometimes they lack their capability. They don't have enough capacity to implement this resolution, because you need a good custom system, you need a good border control, everything. So in those cases, some countries that have these capabilities provide assistance to those who lack such capabilities.
Exactly. And of course, all the issues we're talking about today, our viewers can learn more about. They could Google a lot of them. They could go to un.org, or they could go to the Republic of Korea's website at www.un.mofat.go.kr and tap into these issues. There are so many activities underway, and I'm thinking of, well, South Korea and North Korea. There's obviously, remember the war from 1950 to 1953, the Korean War. We could spend 2 or 3 hours talking about that, but basically, what is the status today between the South and the North? And that could change 10 minutes from now, I understand, but are there initiatives underway? I know there are initiatives underway to promote peaceful exchanges and that type of thing, but is there a role that the UN can play? The UN has been actively involved in that area, but very briefly, what is the status?
Well, there have been ups and downs in inter-Korean relations, what you call inter-Korean relations. Right now, we resumed talks with North Korea at official level, but that does not necessarily mean that we have a full rapprochement. Even though there are some areas where we have maintained cooperation with North Korea, in some other areas we have had conflicts. South Korea has been under a constant threat of North Korea in some aspects, but the fact that we are talking to each other, I think it's a good sign. I hope there will be more progress.
And of course, dialogue is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Between any parties that where there are
true.
misunderstandings, there has to be dialogue.
That's right,
If we
yeah.
preclude or exclude the other party, we'll never come to an agreement. So that's very encouraging. While we're talking about the Koreas, there have only been 8 Secretaries General of the United Nations, and the 8th Secretary General is Ban Ki-moon, a fellow countryman. It must be a tremendous amount of pride to have someone from South Korea or from any country be selected as the Secretary General, basically the CEO of the United Nations, is it not?
Yeah, we are very proud of him. He's a son of Korea, but as a Secretary General, I think he's carrying out his duties very well. So we support him not only as Korean but as a member state of the United Nations. I mean, Korea, South Korea being a responsible member of the United Nations. We support him as the Secretary General, and we are very pleased to see him playing his role. Of course, he's faced with a lot of challenges, but he's playing his role very constructively and always thinking about how to contribute to the international community.
And that's a very important point, because when people come to the UN to work in the Secretariat, be it as Secretary General or an Undersecretary General or a field person or whatever it might be in the World Food Program or the UN Children's Fund, they really become, they're from a country, but they're international civil servants or international public administrators, and they are working for the betterment of not their country in particular, but the world, and certainly the people with where they're working. So it's
That's
an
true.
extremely
Yeah.
important point to bring out, and I'm glad you did that. As you look at the United Nations and the issues that you're dealing with, and you're dealing with some extremely important and very, I would say, difficult issues to deal with. They're not easy issues to resolve, or if they were, we would have resolved them 20, 30 years ago, perhaps. But as you look at the United Nations, what do you see as some of the major challenges for the UN? I know climate change is one of them, and we'll hopefully get into that in a few minutes, but are there others that are out there that the UN will be dealing with as we move into the 21st century?
Well, I think the founding fathers of the UN Charter, when they came up with 3 important pillars for the United Nations work, meaning peace and security, development, and human rights, I think they were very wise. They were looking into the future, not least because those days, for example, human rights might not have been a huge issue, but right now they are. So I think these 3 critical areas for the work of the United Nations are very important for all of us, for the world, and how to develop the United Nations for the future of the world is all, in our hands, in the hands of the member states, in the hands of the international community. So I think we should really work together to develop the United Nations that way.
It's certainly a collective effort, and we can't solve problems such as climate change or even regional conflicts without cooperation. Well, I mentioned climate change, and that's been one of the #1 priorities, especially for Ban Ki-moon as Secretary General. We have a major conference in Lima coming up at the end of the year. The big one is in Paris the next year. What would you like to see come out of these climate change conferences? Because I'm sure South Korea has been affected, as every country has in the world, by climate change to some degree. But what would you like to see come out of the conference as far as moving us forward to deal with this problem that affects all 7.3 billion people on the earth?
Well, we agreed on kind of temporary solution a few years back, which will be applied until 2020. But we need a more, we need a longer-term solution for the efforts of the international community to deal with climate change. Of course, the burden should be shared by all the nations, developed and developing. So probably by next year, by Paris, I hope we will be able to agree on a longer-term agreement solution.
Exactly, yes. Well, in the closing, as you look at the UN, do you have any suggestions on something the UN can do differently? I know you're interested in governance, your management of the UN internally and externally. Do you have any recommendations on perhaps what the UN can do to improve its efficiency or effectiveness to make it more, really more effective in the world?
Yeah, because we don't have such a thing as a world government. I think opinion is divided as to whether we would like to develop the United Nations into something like a world government or not. But personally, I think the United Nations should play a more role, stronger role, and eventually it might play a role like a world government. I think eventually that will benefit a lot of people in the world.
Exactly. And the UN is still the only place in the world that brings all 193 countries of all 193 governments, I should say, of the world together under one roof to deal with these problems. And as you mentioned quite accurately, when the UN was set up in 1945 to really to eliminate the scourge of war, to promote economic and social development, and to enhance human rights. And we've seen the evolution of the UN over the years through the development of the peacekeeping missions. We've seen how human rights, the definition of human rights, has changed from when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was set up in 1948 by the UN General Assembly. But the UN is evolving. It is playing a much more active role in the world today in the areas that you talked about, developmental disabilities, through war and peace, through weapons of mass destruction, and just on across the board in just about every area. But Ambassador Oh Joon, the permanent representative from the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, I want to thank you so very much for being with me today, and thank you for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much, Pierre.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.